into the heart of darkness. The stairs descended in a slow spiral, each step worn smooth by centuries of feet. Pilgrims once, cultists now. Torchlight flickered against walls carved with symbols that predated Stormmore by millennia, their meanings lost to time, but their malevolence perfectly preserved. The fragment in Edrick's chest pulsed in rhythm with his footsteps, growing warmer with each level he descended. Behind him, 50 cultists followed in procession. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their green fire eyes tracked his every movement, their cracked lips curled in anticipation. They knew what he was, they knew what he carried, and they knew where he was going. The sealing blade hung heavy at his hip, its weight both reassuring and damning. Each time he touched the hilt, the fragment surged with recognition. The weapon and the darkness within him were made of the same substance, calling to each other like long-separated lovers. "This is what you were always meant to be," the devourer whispered through the fragment. "Not a king, not a hero, but a vessel." Edrick's jaw clenched. The silver leaf had worn off hours ago, leaving nothing between his consciousness and the ancient hunger that gnawed at his thoughts. He could feel the devourer's amusement at his defiance, could sense its patience. It had waited 3,000 years. It could wait a few more hours. The stairs ended in a vast chamber where 3 passages branched in different directions. The air here tasted of copper and rot, and the walls glistened with moisture that might have been water or might have been something worse. The fragment pulled him toward the eastern passage with such force that Edrick stumbled. One of the cultists, a woman whose gray skin had split like dried earth, stepped forward. "The convergence chamber lies ahead, Majesty." Her voice held no mockery in the title, only reverence. The fragments have been waiting so long for their heart to return. "I'm not your king," Edrick said, his voice rough. "Not yet." She smiled, revealing teeth that had grown too sharp. "But you will be, the Devourer King, as was always meant to be, as your ancestor Aldrich promised when he took the heart into his line." Edrick wanted to argue, to deny, but the fragment pulsed with agreement. Deep in his bones, he felt the truth of it. Aldrich had made a choice 3,000 years ago, and every generation since had paid the price. He moved forward into the eastern passage. The cultists followed like a tide of corruption. Above, in the pre-dawn darkness, Illyria pressed herself against the fortress's eastern wall and counted her heartbeats. 30 cultists on the walls. Another 20 patrolling the courtyard. Too many to fight directly, but fighting wasn't the plan. She glanced back at Rose and Shamaz, who waited in the shadow of a collapsed tower 50 yards away. Rose's hand rested on her sword hilt, her face tight with barely controlled fear. Not for herself. Rose had never feared death. But watching Edrick walk into that fortress, feeling the wrongness radiating from its depths, Shamaz touched Rose's shoulder, his weathered face grave. "He knows what he's doing." "Does he?" Rose's voice cracked. "Or is that thing in his chest making him think he does?" "Both, perhaps." Shamaz's staff pulsed with faint silver light. "But we must trust that some part of him remains, that when we reach him, he will still be Edrick." Illyria turned away from them and studied the wall. The eastern side was older than the rest, its stones crumbling in places where roots had forced their way through. There, a gap where 2 stones had fallen away, creating a narrow opening barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. She waited for the patrol to pass, then moved. Her body folded through the gap with practiced ease, and suddenly she was inside old Ravenhold's walls. The courtyard stank of corruption and old blood. Symbols had been painted on every surface in what looked like rust, but probably wasn't. The entrance to the catacombs yawned in the center of the courtyard, a black mouth that seemed to swallow light. Edrick had gone down there an hour ago. She needed to follow to reach him before the ritual began. But the cultists... A hand touched her shoulder. Illyria spun, daggers appearing in her hands, but it was only Rose. The warrior had followed her through the gap, her sword already drawn. "Couldn't let you go alone," Rose whispered. Behind her, Shamaz squeezed through the opening with considerably more difficulty, his staff scraping against stone. "Nor I," he said quietly. "Whatever happens below, we face it together." Illyria wanted to argue. The plan had been for her to infiltrate alone while they provided distraction and escape. But looking at Rose's determined face, at Shamaz's steady resolve, she found she couldn't. They were right. This was not a burden to be carried alone. Then we move quickly, she said, before they realize we're here. They crossed the courtyard in silence, keeping to shadows that seemed to writhe with their own hunger. The entrance to the catacombs breathed cold air that tasted of ancient stone and newer corruption. Aluria descended first, Rose and Shamaz following close behind. The stairs spiraled down into darkness deeper than night. Edrick stood at the threshold of the convergence chamber and felt his heart try to stop. The room was vast, easily 100 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow. 3 ley lines met here. He could see them now, rivers of power that flowed beneath the world's skin, their light visible through cracks in reality itself. One burned green as the fragment in his chest, one shimmered silver like starlight, one pulsed red as fresh blood. At the center, where the 3 lines converged, stood an altar of black stone. And above the altar, suspended in the air by nothing visible, hung 4 fragments of the Devourer. They were beautiful and terrible. Each the size of a human heart, they pulsed with green fire and whispered in voices that bypassed the ears entirely. The north fragment sang of hunger. The south fragment spoke of endings. The east fragment promised power beyond measure. The west fragment offered rest, sweet surrender, the peace of letting go. And the fragment in Edric's chest, the heart, the largest piece, the one Aldrich had bound into his bloodline 3,000 years ago, sang back to them in recognition and desperate longing. Home, the Devourer whispered through all 5 pieces at once. Finally, home. Edric's hand found the sealing blade's hilt. The weapon hummed with power, recognizing the fragments, yearning to be whole again. Because the blade was made of the same substance, pieces of the Devourer that Aldrich had torn away and forged into a weapon. The cultists filed into the chamber and formed a circle around the altar. 50 voices began to chant in a language older than kingdoms, older than the current age of the world. The ley lines brightened in response, their power feeding into the fragments, making them pulse faster. The lead cultist, the woman with split gray skin, stepped forward. "Remove the blade, Majesty. Let the reunification begin." Edric's hand tightened on the hilt. Every instinct screamed at him to draw it, to fight, to resist. But he could feel the fragment's eagerness, could sense how close it was to overwhelming his control entirely. If he drew the blade now, in this place of power, with the other fragments so close, I become exactly what they want, he realized. The blade feeds the fragment grows stronger. And when they're all together, I won't be able to stop them from merging. But Aluria's theory echoed in his mind. What if you confuse with both the blade and the fragment on your own terms? The woman stepped closer. The Devourer is patient, but patience has limits. Draw the blade, let us make you whole. Edric met her burning eyes. No. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. The chanting faltered. The fragment in his chest surged with rage, sending white-hot pain through his body. Edric gasped but didn't fall. You refuse? The woman's voice held disbelief. But you walked here willingly. You descended into our sanctuary. You stand before the altar where your destiny waits. I came here, Edric said through gritted teeth, because you were always going to try this ritual. Better to face it on my terms than yours. Your terms? The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You have no terms. You are the vessel, the prison, the willing sacrifice that Aldrich promised. Your bloodline exists for this purpose alone. Edric's hand moved to his chest, pressing against the fragment that pulsed beneath his skin. Aldrich made a choice, but I'm not Aldrich. The fragment screamed inside him, a sound only he could hear. The 4 suspended pieces brightened, their light becoming painful to look at. The ley lines surged, power building toward some terrible crescendo. And then from the chamber's entrance, a voice cut through the chanting. Neither is he alone. Rose stepped into the firelight, her sword drawn and gleaming. Aluria emerged from shadow on the chamber's far side, daggers ready. Shamaz descended the final stairs, his staff blazing with silver light that pushed back the green fire. The cultists turned as one, their formation breaking, the lead woman's face twisted with fury. Kill them. The ritual must not be. Edric drew the sealing blade. Power exploded through the chamber. The fragment in his chest surged with recognition, feeding on the blade's essence growing stronger, but Edric had expected that. He'd been preparing for it since the Weeping Stones, learning the fragment's patterns, understanding its hunger. You want to be whole, he thought at the darkness inside him. So do I, but not as your puppet. He raised the blade toward the 4 suspended fragments. They pulsed in response, pulling toward him, toward their lost heart. The cultists screamed and charged, but Rose was already moving, her sword finding the first gray-skinned throat. Alluria's daggers flashed purple in the firelight. Shamaz's staff swept cultists aside like wheat before a scythe. Edric walked toward the altar. Each step was agony. The fragment fought him, tried to seize control, but he pushed forward through sheer force of will. The blade hummed in his hand, growing heavier with each heartbeat. The 4 fragments descended toward him, drawn by the heart's call. Green fire filled his vision. The devourer's voice rose to a deafening roar. Yes! Come to me! Be whole! Be... Edric slammed the sealing blade point first into the altar. The black stone cracked. The ley lines flared so bright that everyone in the chamber cried out and looked away. And in that moment of blinding light, Edric felt something shift inside him. Not the fragment taking control, but something else. Something Alluria had theorized about. The blade and the fragment, both made of the devourer's essence, both yearning to be whole. What if they could be whole in him? Not as a vessel for the creature's return, but as a prison that walked and breathed and chose its own path? The cycle breaks when the king becomes the blade. Edric understood now. Not death, not surrender, but transformation. He pulled the sword from the cracked altar and turned to face the 4 approaching fragments. They hovered 3 feet away, pulsing with hunger and hatred and desperate need. The cultists had stopped fighting, watching with a mixture of horror and anticipation. Rose stood at his side, her sword ready. Edric, what are you doing? What I should have done from the beginning. He raised the sealing blade. Alluria was right. I can't fight this by resisting. I have to accept it, control it, make it mine. That's insane, Rose breathed. If you let those fragments merge, they're going to merge anyway, Edric interrupted. The seals are failing. The rituals are accelerating. We can't stop it. But maybe I can direct it. Shamaz's voice was quiet but urgent. Edric, if you miscalculate, then Rose keeps her promise. Edric met his sister's eyes, through darkness and light. Until the end, Rose finished, tears streaming down her face. Edric turned back to the fragments. The one from the north drifted closer, drawn by the heart's call. He could feel its hunger, its rage, its desperate need to be whole again. He opened himself to it. The fragment slammed into his chest with the force of a hammer blow. Edric screamed as green fire raced through his veins, as ancient hunger tried to devour him from within. But he held the sealing blade, and the blade was also the devourer. And somehow, impossibly, he was the bridge between them. The north fragment merged with the heart. 2 pieces, now 1. The pain was indescribable. The south fragment approached. Edric barely had time to breathe before it too crashed into him, adding its essence to the growing mass of darkness in his chest. His knees buckled. Rose caught him, holding him upright. "Don't let go," she whispered. "Don't you dare let go." The east fragment, the west fragment, each one adding to the terrible whole, each one trying to consume him, to make him nothing more than a shell for the devourer's return. But Edric held the sealing blade, and the blade was his birthright, and he was Aldrich's heir. He would not break. The final fragment merged. 5 pieces, reunited after 3,000 years. The devourer roared in triumph, and found itself trapped. Not in stone, not in scattered bloodlines, but in a single man who refused to surrender, who held the blade that was forged from the creature's own essence, who had made himself the prison. Edric opened his eyes. They burned with green fire, but behind the fire something human remained. His voice, when he spoke, carried an echo of ancient hunger, but the words were his own. "I am King Edric of Stormmore, and you are mine now." The devourer screamed inside him, raging against its new cage. The cultists stood frozen in horror, their purpose stolen, their god imprisoned in flesh that wouldn't submit. Rose stared at him, sword raised, torn between keeping her promise and hoping against hope that her brother still lived behind those burning eyes. Edric met her gaze and managed a smile that was almost human. "I'm still here, Rose, but so is it. And the fight is just beginning." The chamber trembled. The ley lines pulsed with unstable power, and somewhere deep in the earth, in the place where the devourer had been imprisoned for 3 millennia, a vast emptiness opened as the creature's essence left its ancient cage forever. The prison was empty. The devourer walked free, but it walked in chains forged of human will and royal blood, and a blade that knew its master's name.
Thanks for watching our stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic adventures.